transcription and recording has started. Brilliant. That's fantastic. So the overview of today's session, we'll look at the current standards and the work of the HCPC more generally. And then my colleagues will go over the proposed new standards and have a time for capturing thoughts. We're going to be using polls, chat and Slido to capture people's thoughts. And then we'll look at the post-consultation activities that we're planning and how you can get involved. So if we go to the next slide. As a sort of beginning kind of icebreaker and to let people know who each other is in the session, if people can use the chat function to perhaps put in your name and profession, your job role, and the interest you have into joining today's session on upskilling and training. It's really useful for us also, and hopefully for each other, to see where people are coming from, the different kind of professions we're talking to, and to get different kind of perspectives. So if you have any, if you are happy to do that, please do kind of put in the chat function and introduce yourselves as we go through the session. We'll obviously leave that open and let people put that in there. So to the role of the HCPC more generally, as many of you will know, we are a statutory regulator regulating 15 different professions across the UK. Our role is to protect the public and maintain confidence in the professions that we regulate. The heart of our mission is to uphold high standards in those professions. And we do this a number of ways. We've got the slide illustrating it here. One is through regulation. And clearly we achieve this by maintaining and publishing the accurate register of professionals. We quality assure education and training programs. We set appropriate standards like the ones we're talking about today, and we respond to fitness to practice concerns and take action to protect the public where that's necessary. Another function is learning. We harness our data to have more informed insights about the impact of our processes and take that learning to improve our regulatory activity, future approaches and decision making. And we use that what we know from our own learning and that of others to promote positive and inclusive professional working environments. And finally, preventative action. We develop an approach based on preventative action. This will use our learning to address and reduce the conditions that may contribute to instances of service user harm. A preventative approach supports quality practice by articulating the expected standards, helping registrants overcome barriers they face in meeting those standards and reducing the need for unnecessary fitness to practice actions. And we do this partly through our professional liaison service, some of whom are on the call today. This is through education and influence, promoting professionalism, ethical behaviours, and enabling current and future registrants to embed and achieve high professional standards. That's sort of a little bit about what we do. And then we can move on to kind of our standards. We have kind of three main sets of standards we're highlighting here today. Our first, and the one we're talking about in this session, is our standards of conduct, performance and ethics, which we are consulting on currently. And I think we'll put a link in the chat in a second to the consultation itself. And please do respond to it directly if you have the ability to do so. These are the standards that service users expect of you, and there are 10 of those, and we'll come on to those very, very shortly. Our second set, which are highlighted here in the middle in the blue, are our standards of proficiency. We've chosen occupational therapists for no particular reason. They're just the one that are there on the slide. And these are the threshold standards that are necessary to protect the public. And each profession has its own standards of proficiency, like the occupational therapist highlighted on the screen. And they set clear expectations of the knowledge and abilities you should have when you start to practice your profession. And just also mention for those who may not be aware, we are updating our standards of proficiency, and the new ones will go live on the 1st of September of this year. And we have kind of links, hopefully we can put in the chat, to our standards of proficiency changes. And there's a really good gap analysis tool on our website to make sure that you're fully aware for your profession of where the standards may have changed. We're also running some sessions similar to this on standards of proficiency. We should also link you to on our events page. And finally, as mentioned on the screen there, we have our standards for continuing professional development. And the CPD is a way in which you can keep your skills and knowledge up to date throughout your career. And these set the standards for your ongoing learning and development. And there are lots and lots of resources on our website to support you to meet your CPD requirements. And we hope to do more on this later in the year also. The next slide just highlights what we're talking about today. So our standards for conduct, performance and ethics. We won't go through kind of all the details there, but we have 10 of them, and they are on the screen currently. And then kind of the question of why and how. So the way that we look at our standards, they're not prescriptive, but instead they provide a high level framework within which we believe you should practice. And this is a good thing, we think, as it gives you autonomy and flexibility to practice in the way that you need to. How to meet them, what is and is not appropriate, will depend on the circumstances of your individual practice and the context in which you're working. That is why we often say you need to use your professional judgment to assess what is safe and effective practice for you in the context, in the way in which you're working. So essentially, our standards provide a high level framework for you to use your professional judgment, and they're not prescriptive, into how to meet the demands in your practice, and it all depends on the context, which we believe, as I say, adds to the flexibility and autonomy that you can be as kind of registrants and practitioners. So that's roughly where we are in terms of what we do and the standards that we regulate. I'm going to pass over now to my colleague Rosemary to go over some of the proposed new standards, and we can begin our discussion on the changes. So over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Adam. So, hello everybody. I'm Rosemary Flowers-Wanjie. I did introduce myself a little bit earlier in the chat, and it's great to see so many people introducing themselves in the chat. So thank you so far for that really great engagement, everybody. And yeah, hopefully we can keep that engagement going throughout the session. We're really here to hear from you about what you think of these new proposed standards. So yeah, today I'll be talking to you about some of the changes that we have proposed to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, specifically those relating to a registrant's upskilling and training responsibilities. So first of all, I'll talk about the review that we've done so far. So our review to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics began in 2022. And the purpose of this review really is threefold. It's to make any necessary updates to the current standards that reflect changes to practice, to ensure that the current standards are fit for practice, and to gain insight into how we can better communicate the standards and promote them to ensure they are fully understood by registrants. Many of the proposals that we have published are based on engagement from stakeholders during our pre-consultation workshops and also our online survey in summer 2022. The workshops that we hosted not only supported registrant understanding of the current standards, they also promoted a lot of helpful and informative discussions concerning the standards. And through this quality engagement, we were able to propose areas of change relevant to registrant practice and current concerns as well. They were held online and attended by a wide range of our stakeholder groups. So registrants, people from trade unions, professional bodies, really a lot of different people attended those. It was really good. And our pre-consultation online survey, as I said, that ran in summer 2022, and it gathered information regarding stakeholder understanding of the standards. And again, it was just a really great opportunity for us to hear about different experiences, particularly registrant experiences, and the concerns that our different stakeholder groups had regarding the current standards. And the feedback that we received was analysed, and we identified a number of key themes for change within the standards. These you can see reflected in our drafting of the proposed standards and the consultation that we have published. So we launched the consultation at the end of March this year, and it will remain open for public response until the 16th of June. The consultation period is really an opportunity for us to hear detailed feedback from all of our stakeholders regarding the proposed changes that we've made to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, and also our guidance on social media that sits alongside those standards. I really encourage you all to take part in the consultation. It's really the best way for us to hear your views on the proposals that we've made. And so based on our pre-consultation engagement, we identified 5 main areas of change to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, which you can see on the slides here. So they are equality, diversity and inclusion, communication, duty of candour, upskilling and training, managing existing health conditions and disabilities in the workplace. And we've also discussed sustainability as a possible future area of change to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. Each of our consultation workshops is dedicated to exploring one of these themes. And today, of course, we are here to talk about upskilling and training responsibilities. So before we move on to that, I can see my colleague Kim has come on camera, so I'm hoping that our Slido slide is ready. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to go on to another one just briefly.
Thank you, Rosemary. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay and see if we can make it work. So sorry about the little technical glitches that we always get, don't we, when we are working. So Rosemary, I'm just going to open the Slido if that's okay. It might look a little bit different on your screen, but it's just about to come up on the screen if that's okay. So
No
this is the
worries.
question that we'd like to ask everybody, isn't it, Rosemary? Is what changes would you like to see related to upskilling and training in our new standards of conduct, performance and ethics? And if you go onto slido.com and you put in the code 3062385, and that will give you a platform where you can put anonymous comments in. So I'm hoping it's going to work, Rosemary. If somebody could just kindly put hello on it, it always makes me feel a lot better. But it's ready to take your comments. And I will carry on through the slides, Rosemary, while everybody just has a go, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kim, for putting up our Slido.
Rosemary, sorry, I can see it is working because somebody's typing, so that's good. There we go. Somebody kindly put hello just to make myself feel better.
Oh, thank you so much, whoever did that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'll carry on, Rosemary. Thank you, Kim.
Perfect, that's great. So yes, so yeah, we'll refer to your contributions during the session a little later on. And just to note that your contributions on Slido are anonymous. The ones that you make on the chat, we can see your name, but that won't be visible on the recording that we release later. So on the slide that we currently have, you can see the standards of conduct, performance and ethics that we're talking about today. So standards 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3. So as we mentioned earlier on, the standards of conduct, performance and ethics are 10 standards, and then they break down into further detail. So here you can see some of that detail in the proposed changes that we've made. So these particular standards relate to how we expect HCPC registrants to manage their upskilling and training responsibilities. The standard 3.1 states that registrants must only practice in the areas where they have the appropriate knowledge and skills and experiences to meet the needs of a service user safely and effectively. This is what was previously referred to as a registrant's scope of practice. So we've also proposed a new standard 3.2 to explicitly state that a registrant must undertake additional training to update their knowledge, skills and experience to widen their scope of practice. Oh, and I've just had a look at the chat. It looks like there is a slight pause in the Slido, so do just bear with us on that. So, and going back to my slide, we've also proposed standard 3.3, which is the previous standard 3.2 and the current standards. And that says that a registrant is expected to refer to a service user to an appropriate practitioner if the care, treatment, or other services that that service user needs are beyond their scope of practice. So it states that the practitioner whom one refers to must hold the appropriate knowledge, skills and experience to meet the needs of the service user safely and effectively. So the feedback that these changes are based on relates to our workshop and survey participants asking for more clarity around this standard. We also often receive questions from registrants about what scope of practice means as well. That's both in our policy inbox. So some of you might know that you can actually email the policy team and ask for advice in relation to our policies, our standards. And often the questions that we got, particularly during the pandemic and after the pandemic, were what does scope of practice mean, for example? And we therefore changed the wording of this standard to reflect the meaning of scope of practice. So having the appropriate knowledge, skills and experience to meet the needs of a service user safely and effectively. So here, the addition of the words safely and effectively is the highlight. By adding those words, what we've done is ensured that our the primary interest that we have, safety and effectiveness of care, is clear in these standards that relate to scope of practice. At the HCPC, we do not define a registrant's scope of practice. So that means that there's not a set list of tasks that our professions can and cannot perform. What task that each registrant can perform will vary from registrant to registrant. And therefore, by focusing on the safety and effectiveness of a registrant's practice, we're highlighting the varied context that our registrants work in, and that in all of those contexts, it's public protection and safety that is our primary concern. Moreover, the language that we've used allows an individual registrant's scope of practice to change over time. So next slide, please. Oh, actually, I think I've gotten a little bit muddled in the slides. Can we go back to slide 16, please? Oh, perfect. Okay. So with that in mind, we've proposed the new standard 3.2 to outline the actions that a registrant can take to widen their scope of practice. So again, talking about during the pandemic, we noticed many of the queries that we received from registrants were asking for further guidance on taking new roles, so widening one's scope of practice. And this really represents the changing nature of health and care in the UK, where more and more professionals are taking on new roles and new tasks. And we heard about this change in the nature to health and care throughout our workshops and in our online survey too. Many participants talked about the need to be flexible in their practice and being asked to take on tasks that were outside of their scope when they first started to practice. The changes we have proposed provide clarity on this by explicitly stating that a registrant must undertake additional training to update their knowledge and skills and experience if they want to widen their practice. This is in direct correlation with ensuring that a registrant widens their scope of practice that enables them to provide service and care in a safe and effective way. So one would undertake that additional training to update the knowledge, skills and experience to make sure that they're providing care in a safe and effective way. And these changes are really incredibly important to reflect the changing nature of health and care work and the flexibility that many health and care professionals and our registrants need. So the changes, I think we're going on to the next slide now, should be slide 17, hopefully. The changes that we've proposed to standard 3.3, which is currently standard 3.2, deal with the circumstances in which a registrant cannot provide services or care because to do so would fall outside of their scope of practice. In other words, they do not have the knowledge, skills and experience to fulfill or carry out that care or service, and they have not undertaken training that would provide them with that knowledge, skills or experience. And again, these changes follow the queries we receive from registrants about who to refer a service user to when a service user's care or treatment falls outside of one's scope of practice. And much of the feedback that we heard in our workshops and survey results also discussed this issue, particularly when a service user, their carer or a colleague is asking a registrant to work outside of their scope of practice or, to take on a new task. And the changes that we have proposed make it clear that in the circumstances where the needs of a service user falls outside of one's scope of practice, a registrant must refer to another practitioner. And the important thing here is that practitioner has the appropriate knowledge, skills and experience. They have their scope of practice to meet the needs of the service user safely and effectively. The added emphasis is on the person who a registrant refers to being someone who can fulfill the service user's needs in a safe and effective way, just like that change that we made to 3.1. So when revising the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, it was important that we seek to align our standards with the online materials on our website and our other standards, for example, the standards of proficiency. In our online materials, we have stated clearly the different considerations that a registrant must make when defining their own scope of practice. So you can see here on the slide the different things that we say. This is actually the different things that we say in our online materials to think about when you're defining your scope of practice. So firstly, do you have the skills and knowledge to carry out the activity safely and effectively? There are those words, safely and effectively, that we've integrated, as we've seen, into the proposed standard 3.1. Secondly, our online materials require registrants to consider whether they can complete other training or receive other support, for example, supervision, that will provide them with the knowledge, skills and experience to carry out the activity safely and effectively. And you'll remember from our previous slides that we were just looking at that undertaking additional training is now referred to explicitly in the standards of conduct, performance and ethics through standard 3.2. And there are two other additional considerations that a registrant can make in order to define their scope of practice. These are not explicitly referred to in the standards, but they do remain in our online materials, and those are whether the activity is restricted by law, and does one's professional indemnity insurance cover the activity. These aspects are really important to consider when defining your scope of practice once you've established and met standard 3.1 and 3.2. It is worth noting that the online materials we have are an important source of information, and they're incredibly helpful in gaining insight into how to apply the standards in practice. In relation to upskilling and training responsibilities, we have a lot of information on our scope of practice pages, and even have an FAQ section where we answer questions about one's scope of practice. So, excuse me. Please do refer to those pages when you're seeking to learn about your standards, and I think we can just put those links into the chat as well, if that's possible, please. So before we move on, I'll go on to the next slide. I also want to highlight the other standards that refer to upskilling and training responsibilities in the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. So that's just on the next slide. Perfect. So these are areas in which they relate to upskilling and training responsibilities, but we haven't made any changes. So firstly, in relation to maintaining and developing one's knowledge and skills in standard 3.4 and to 3.6, these standards require a registrant to maintain their CPD commitments and to keep up to date with their profession. It also covers in standard 3.5 the necessity for registrants to follow the law, our guidance and other requirements that are relevant to their profession. Finally, standard 3.6 requires registrants to ask for feedback to help themselves improve their practice. So again, just to highlight, these standards have not changed, and we receive little direct feedback in relation to these particular standards, and the feedback that we received generally said that they are written clearly and that registrants understood their responsibilities within these particular standards 3.4 to 3.6 fully. And another area, going on to the next slide, that's relevant to upskilling and training responsibilities is delegation, oversight and support. Again, these standards, this is 4.1 and 4.2, have had no changes made to them. And again, in our review to these standards, the feedback we received was that these were clearly written and registrants understood what was expected of them. And so here we can see that registrants under 4.1 must only dedicate work to someone who has knowledge, skills and experience needed to carry out that activity safely and effectively. And again, that correlates with those changes that we've made to 3.1. And 4.2, you must continue to provide appropriate supervision and support to those you delegate work to. Again, making sure essentially that they are working within their scope of practice, that they are getting that training and upskilling that they need as well, and participating in that for others as well as yourself. Okay, going on to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, it's great to hear from you in relation to these proposals. And that really is what the consultation period is all about. It's what all these these workshops are about as well. So I hope that while I've been talking, you've been busy on our Slido channel sharing your views about upskilling and training responsibilities. And I will go now onto a couple of short polls that I'll launch in just a second. So they should come up on your screen as I launch them. The first question is upskilling and training an area of concern for you? So do be honest in your responses. You know, really the most important thing is that there's no right answer. We just want to hear your honest answers and what's right for you. So I can see lots of people are answering and providing feedback. If you want to expand upon your response, please do so in the chat or in the Slido as well. It's completely up to you. So far we've got a mixed response here. So we've got 50% of people are saying that upskilling and training is an area of concern for them. And then we've also got 41% saying sometimes. We've got a full range of responses here as well. Almost everybody has responded, which is really, really great. And we've got just a small minority of people saying that upskilling and training isn't an area of concern for them, which is also good, because hopefully that means that they know their upskilling and training responsibilities very well. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating in that. We've still got some responses coming through and things changing a little bit, but generally, most people are saying that this is an area of concern for them, or is sometimes an area of concern for them. So I'm going to launch our next poll, and that asks, are the proposed changes to standard 3.1 to 3.3 clear? And again, this is specifically in reference to the changes that we've proposed that focus on registrants' upskilling and training responsibilities. So yeah, do have a look at that and tell us what you think. Again, please do expand on your response in the chat if you like, or in the Slido if you'd like to give us your opinion anonymously. So we've got a good number of responses, again, really changing as well. So we've got 49% of people saying that the proposed changes to 3.1 to 3.3 are clear. And we've got an equal number, 48% now, saying that they are somewhat clear. So that's also good to hear. It's very helpful feedback. We've got some people saying that 6% saying that the proposed changes are not clear at all. Please put your expand upon your opinion, your views in the chat so that we know how they're not clear to you. It's very, very helpful to hear that. And also, if you want to provide an even more detailed response, please do also remember to respond to our consultation by following the link that my colleague Kim has popped into the chat, and that gives you the opportunity to tell us more about what you think, and like I say, give us that detailed feedback on the proposed standards. And it really is such an important part of us updating the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, and also the guidance on social media, which is also included in that consultation, and you can provide responses to that as well. And okay, so thank you very much for listening to the proposed changes. I'm just going to head over to the chat to see if we've got any questions coming through that I can answer. And I can see Kim's come back online as well.
Rosemary, we're having a bit of a technical issue, so I can't share the Slido results on the screen for everybody, but everybody can see it anyway, so they can see it where they voted, so they can see all the comments that are coming in. And I know that you can't see them either, because you probably haven't logged on either. But perhaps could I just read out a couple of questions and a couple of thoughts that people have said?
Sure,
Is that
that's
okay?
great, Kim. Yeah, perfect.
I think there's some really concerns, quite a lot of concerns about the pressure, and that some organisations, often the first thing to be let go is training budgets, isn't it, and CPD activities when times are tough. And I think people are sort of saying the HCPC needs to show it's aware that under pressure services often pull the training budgets or CPD activities first. Now that is something we're very well aware of, and I know that, yeah, I'll let you answer that because you've beefed up the these requirements, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. And really the standards are also there for your use as registrants as well, so that you can advocate for yourselves, advocate for the things that you need in your training, and to fulfill your roles responsibly. And so the changes that we've made hopefully make that more clear, so that you can use them more effectively in that way. And ensure that when you are talking to managers, for example, about your training requirements, you can use the standards to say, well, actually, I need this in order to actually carry out my role as a professional. And yeah, so I think that's really quite an important role of the standards. It's not just there to tell you what to do. These standards are also here to help you to fulfill your professional duties properly.
And another thing that's coming up quite a lot, both in the polling, Rosemary, and in a couple of the chat comments, is the scope of practice. I think it's great that you brought that up. I know you have lots of queries from registrants about scope practice, don't you? And I think Joseph has kindly said, if a professional is working in a place where there are short of staff, and the professional is forced to carry out a role he is not skilled at, what should he do? So being forced to act out of your scope of practice.
So again, it is really about your options there are to get more training, experience and skills in order to carry out that that task. It can also, that can also include asking for supervision. That's a part of training, and also delegating to somebody else who does have those the skills, experience and knowledge required. And of course, we do recognise that everybody works within different contexts, and often these contexts are quite pressured, and there is a lack of resource in some areas. And that is, again, that's why these standards are important. We do have to think of public protection as health and care professionals, and that really means using your standards to say, I cannot carry out a task that is outside of my scope of practice without widening my scope of practice by taking on training, or I'm going to need to refer to someone else, delegate to someone else.
That makes it really clear. I think quite a few people want a bit more specifics. So, for example, somebody said they'd like to see a clear structure of expectations with upskilling and training, timescales, the amount of CPD needed or advised. And I know that we don't specify the amount of CPD. And that person says, I think it would be easier to schedule into my day-to-day practice if I had that. It's very difficult with our standards and guidance, isn't it? Because it covers so many areas of practice and so many complexities, doesn't it?
Exactly. And, as I'm sure most people here will know, our standards cover 15 different professions that we regulate. So we don't go into specifics. So as I said earlier on, for example, we don't define scope of practice. We couldn't do that for 15 different professions. And obviously the standards of proficiency can give you more information about your scope of practice and about the specific needs for your profession. However, when we're talking about the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, they really are across all the 15 different professions. So they do have to remain fairly high level to ensure that they're relevant to everybody. And also I think it's important to recognise what the purpose of the standards of conduct, performance and ethics is about your behaviour when you're practicing. So that behaviour should be relevant across all 15 professions and should really be the same, coming from the same place, the same values that we represent.
And added on to that, somebody's saying that I think they appreciate all this, but the importance of profession-specific examples needs to be stressed. And I think you're going to come on to that later, actually, when we look at what's going to happen during the implementation, because I think there will be profession-specific examples. But the undergraduates struggle with the generic nature of the standards. So educators need to be guided to earth, I love that word, earth teaching into the realities of practice under pressure.
Yeah,
love that.
I do love that. And also, honestly, I must say I empathise. Writing standards, drafting standards for 15 different professions is challenging, and so it is challenging to have a set of standards for 15 different professions, that everybody working in different contexts, not just across professions but also within professions as well. So I can really understand that, and I think that is where the other standards that we have complement the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. So for example, the standards of proficiency that do provide more detailed standards of what you need to do in your specific profession, and that's and that is whereas again, the standards of conduct, performance and ethics have a very different role, and that is why they are generic, because they are talking about the kind of behaviour that we expect from registrants. And yeah, as Kim said, we will go on a little bit in a little bit to talk about some of the explanatory materials and things like that that will go alongside these standards in the future, when they come into force in September 2024.
Somebody's said that they loved your response to the scope of practice questions. That was really great. Thank you very much. Another one that says maybe some reference to expectations for different levels of practice. Right? So, for example, at advanced level, indications of expectations on support from both the employer and the employee for upskilling and training, including ongoing support for maintaining standards. So very much linked to, you're right, how different our the scope of practices within a professional group, and linking it to advanced practice. So again, really thinking about that huge range of the scope, Rosemary, and how difficult it is to cover all of that within these standards, which apply to every profession and every registrant on our register.
Yeah, it is, and that's also one of the reasons for the changes that we made as well. You know, noticing the plethora of different tasks and roles that people carry out on a day-to-day, and that need for flexibility for almost all professions, and that flexibility comes with training and in gaining more experience and skills and knowledge so that we can carry out those tasks safely and effectively. And that's what these particular standards 3.1 to 3.3 are all about, really.
Thanks, Rosemary. And actually the chat's turning into a sharing of documents that are really super useful. So Gary, thank you so much for your Principles of CPD and Lifelong Learning in Health and Social Care. I've read that, it's really interesting. And Joanne makes a really good point. Have we sort of talked to the professional bodies to guide some of the things you're saying? I know you're in contact with the professional bodies, aren't you? All of them, to sort of look at how they contributed to this as well, haven't they?
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
And part of our pre-consultation engagement was with a wide range of stakeholders, including our professional bodies. And we also have established contact with our professional bodies as well. So we meet with them regularly and talk to them about the work that we're doing, and also hear feedback from them as well. We do think it's important that we work with all of our external stakeholders very closely, particularly when we're talking about updating the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, and we'll continue that conversation as well. So as you'll see in a little bit as we go on to my colleague Maheshi's presentation, part of the presentation, we'll look at the implementation period and how we're going to be continuing that conversation with our different stakeholders as well.
Could I ask you, because I actually don't know the answer to this question, Rosemary, Will the standards of conduct, performance and ethics for students change as well?
Yes, so we will be reviewing those standards as well, and they will be part of the wider review to these standards.
Thanks for that good question, Selena. That was great. Lovely. Okay, thanks ever so much.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Kim. So I'll now hand over to my colleague Maheshi, who will talk about our next steps in the review. And if you keep the discussion going, we'll return to the chat a little bit later, just to have a quick look to see if there's anything else that people would like to raise. And then Maheshi will bring today's session to a close.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rosemary.
everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Rosemary, and hi, everyone. My name is Maheshi de Silva, and I'm part of the Standards and Policy team at the HCPC. So, as Rosemary mentioned briefly earlier, we received feedback during our pre-consultation activities that whilst the standards are accessible, some stakeholders may benefit from more explanatory materials for the standards. So we've therefore proposed the setting up of a pre-launch explanatory materials design group. Members of the group will read the final standards and provide advice on the explanatory materials that would be helpful for readers who are, for example, living with disabilities or neurodiversity, or where English is their second language. We will also set up a pre-launch reading group to further meet our commitments towards equality, diversion and inclusion. This group will be set up to ensure that we understand the potential impact of the new standards on people with protected characteristics. The group will be made up of people from a variety of backgrounds, such as people of colour, people with disabilities and international registrants. So members of the group will then read the final standards before their publication and provide us with valuable feedback. Once the consultation is finished and we have collated responses, we hope to launch the new standards in autumn 2023, which you'll be able to see on the following slide. So to ensure that the new standards are fully disseminated and understood widely, we will have a year-long implementation period where we aim for the standards to come into effect in September 2024. We really want to make sure we keep this conversation about the standards of conduct, performance and ethics ongoing. So therefore our activities in the implementation period will include workshops with registrants and other stakeholders to learn more about what meeting the new standards will look like in practice. So this period will be focused on ensuring that education providers, our internal teams and registrants are ready for the standards to come into effect in September 2024. It will also allow our internal teams and education providers to integrate the new standards into their materials, processes and curriculum effectively. So I hope that has been helpful, but before we close today, we will check our Slido once again and our team chat session to see what new comments and topics have been coming in.
Maheshi, there's not a great deal. There's one that's just literally come in. I'm finding these sessions are health biased. Our members work in education and local authority contexts that provide different challenges. I'm hoping that the online workshops address this. So again, going back to such broad range where registrants are, and it really interesting, which I know you haven't had a chance to get chat, but when people were sharing the roles that they did, it was absolutely fascinating to hear where everybody works. So again, the difficulties of applying our standards to so many different areas. And you've already said how difficult that is, Rosemary, when you're writing them.
It is, definitely. And I think, again, it's...
Oh, Rosemary, I'm not sure we can hear you. Just pop your... That's it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it really is a challenge to be writing these standards for all the very different professions that we regulate and those different contexts that people are in. So, you know, again, it's really, that just highlights how important it is for us to hear from everybody and to hear about if these standards aren't clear in the context that you're working in. You know, please do provide a response to our consultation, give us that detail and that feedback. Honestly, we really do want to hear from you so that we can make these standards as good as possible. and as relevant as possible to your practice as well. And I think it's worth noting again the use of the standards as something for you to advocate for yourself as well. So you can go into your different contexts, your different settings and workplaces that you're in, and use these standards to advocate for yourself, for your profession, and for the things that you need to do to fulfill your to meet your standards as well, and to get the support that you need.
There's another one which I think it plays into exactly what you were saying, Rosemary. So NHS England provide funding for CPD for allied health professionals requiring CPD for their registration. However, this doesn't extend to healthcare science occupations, despite the requirement to evidence CPD. So it's all these nuances within different professions, isn't it? And, you know, if you're, it's about using, I think what you've said quite clearly is about using the standards to drive change or potentially start those conversations. Is that really what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely, exactly. It's to go into your workplaces and say, well, I need to work in this way to meet my standards, and have that conversation with your colleagues and with your managers as well. That is part of the work, the use of the standards. That's how you can use the standards to help you fulfill your duties.
And somebody said, they've said that they're struggling with supervision actually, and that they're balancing, they're struggling to balance clinical supervision with managerial tasks. So again, pressures of workload, you know, and looking at those things that supervision is so important, but trying to balance it. And some supervisions don't have the adequate knowledge base to support ethical, safe practice. So concerns around supervision, Rosemary, and again, that's such a difficult it's sometimes the thing that always gets cut in when pressurized work. It's like we'll stop the training budget, we'll stop the CPD, and you don't need to have your supervision. Do you know what I mean? It's another thing,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, but as you say, supervision does play such an important role in our sort of training responsibilities and things. So it is important that you get the right supervision, that you make the time as well to carry out clinical supervision that your team requires as well. And again, I think it's using these standards to advocate for that within your workplace, and to advocate for that time and that resource that is necessary. Again, I think it's important that we think about the most important thing, which is public protection, and think about how we can protect the public, but as we are working in our professions, and making sure that the services and the care that we provide is safe and effective. That really is the key concern here, and the thing that we should all be thinking about.
Yeah. And just somebody pointing out that it's also sufficient time to provide supervision as well as receive it. But I know there's a couple of comments in chat about people struggling at work because of bullying and harassment, those sort of issues. And I know that he's been answering them. We're talking about freedom to speak up guardians. But again, if you're feeling that you're struggling with something at work and you've got concerns, then please email our policy inbox if you want specific advice, or speak to your professional body. Or Hugh's signposted the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, who's absolutely fantastic. But you know, thank you for sharing those really difficult situations that you're facing in practice. I hope that you've got what you wanted from those responses, but if you haven't, I can only urge you to contact us more, and we'll pop up our email in chat. I'm very, very happy to take emails about anything, aren't we, Rosemary?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, please do get in touch if you require any further help, any further explanation. And you know, we have made changes as well to a number of parts of the standards that relate to bullying, harassment, and also discrimination as well, and trying to encourage people to generate a kind and compassionate working place, and way of working and connecting with their colleagues. And so I think please do engage with the other parts of this consultation as well. We are releasing the recordings of these workshops. So for example, we had a workshop on equality, diversity and inclusion where we talked about bullying and harassment, and also our workshop on communication as well touched on that too. So please do take a look at that. Also take a look at the different documents that we have on the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. Kim's just put it back in the chat again, that that's that page where the recordings will be available, and where all the documentation relating to the consultation is available as well. You can read the different changes that we've made, and also I cannot stress enough the importance of responding to our consultation. Share your experiences with us, share your views on the changes that we've proposed and how you think that we can improve them. If that's you know, if you feel like there's changes that we could make that make the standards more relevant to your experiences, that would have helped you in previous experiences, please share that with us in the consultation response.
Thanks, Rosemary. I think we've probably come to the end of all our questions now.
Perfect. Well, I will hand back to Maheshi, who will bring our session to a close then. Thank you, everybody, so much for your engagement today.
Thank you both, and thanks everyone for your contribution. So lastly, I'd like to draw your attention to some of the sessions that you'll see on your screen now, that we're running in relation to our recent updates to the standards of proficiency. So these include a webinar on equality, diversity and inclusion on the 23rd of May, a session on leadership on the 7th of June, and a session on digital skills and new technologies on the 19th of June. So you can sign up to any of these on our My HCPC Standards webinars on our website, and one of my colleagues would be able to put that link in the Teams chat for you now. But also thank you once again, everyone, for taking time out of your day and joining us. On the next slide, you'll be able to see a few links where you can get in contact with us. So at the top, you have Rosemary's email, you have our social media tags. So please follow us there and interact with us there too. And if you require any further information, or if you have any questions on the standards of conduct, performance and ethics consultation and review, you have our emails, which are listed on the slide there. So you have the policy department, the professional liaison service, the registration department and fitness to practice. So I think that concludes today's session. Thank you everybody for participating and listening today, and goodbye from us here at the HCPC.